Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. With the blessings of the Paramacharyas, this soul has undertaken this journey of reaching the life and works of Saints of India. In the series of Saints of India, in podcast number 2, this soul presents to you Sri Ramana Maharishi. The content has been taken from arunachalasamudra.org and arunachalagrace.blogspot.com. My sincere thanks to Meenakshi Ammal for giving me permission to use the content created by her in the referred portals. The content is short and easily comprehensible. India is known for its art and culture. Besides these two, it has been and continues to be a cradle of noble souls who have been appearing over generations to instill in the wavering minds Sanatana Dharma, also known as Hindu Dharma in the recent centuries. The aim of this series of Saints of India is to reach to the current generation, besides others, the saints of other regions of our motherland. Each listener might have come across saints of their region, but might be unaware of those saints who have appeared in other parts of the country. This soul has put in effort in reaching the life of the saints of India to you. May mankind be blessed. Bhagawan Sri Ramana Maharishi. Venkatraman, later to be known as Ramana, was born 30th December 1879 at 1 a.m. in the village of Tiruchuri, Tamil Nadu. The day of his birth was the auspicious Arudra Darshan, which according to Puranic legend commemorated the manifestation of Lord Shiva on earth. Venkatraman was the second of three sons born to Sundaram Iyer and Azhagammai, who both belonged to the Saivite Brahmin caste that worshipped Lord Shiva as a supreme being. Sundaram Iyer, of whom Ramana would later call a towering presence, was a self-made man who built up a large practice as a pleader at the local magistrate's court. The mother, Azhagammai, a noble woman, was a devoted wife and loving mother. Next to the family home was the Bhuminatha temple, and the young Venkatraman and his friends would sometimes play in the temple's open spaces or in its large exterior hall, and at other times would go outside the village to Kaundinya river to fly kites and sail paper boats. When Venkatraman was 12, the tragic death of his father, Sundaram Iyer, marked the end of a carefree childhood, as the family unit was split up and he was sent to nearby Madurai to live with his paternal uncle, Subba Iyer. There, Venkatraman studied first at Scott's Middle School and later at the American Mission High School. Although he had a remarkable memory and was highly intelligent, he spent little time on studies, preferring instead to take part in sports such as wrestling and swimming. He grew up as just an average boy. He was an indifferent student, not at all serious about his studies. But he was a healthy and strong lad, and his schoolmates and companions were afraid of his strength. If some of them had a grievance against him, they would dare play pranks with him only when he was asleep. In this, he was rather unusual. He would not know of anything that happened to him during sleep. He could be carried away or even beaten without his waking up. A noteworthy event of his early life occurred in November 1895 when Venkatraman met a relative from Tiruchuri who was in an ecstatic mood after returning from a pilgrimage to Arunachala. The boy asked him where he had come from. The relative replied, "From Arunachala." The very name Arunachala acted as a magic spell on Venkatraman, and with an evident excitement, he put his next question to the elderly gentleman. "What? From Arunachala? Where is it?" And got the reply that Tiruvannamalai was Arunachala. On hearing the word Arunachala, the young boy was thrilled with awe and joy. Referring to this incident, the sage says later on in one of his hymns to Arunachala, "O great wonder! As an insentient hill it stands, its action is difficult for anyone to understand. From my childhood, it appeared to my intelligence that Arunachala was something very great. But even when I came to know through another that it was the same as Tiruvannamalai, I did not understand its meaning. When stilling my mind, it drew me up to it, and I came close. I found that it was the immovable." Soon after the incident which attracted Venkatraman's attention to Arunachala, there was another happening which also contributed to the tuning of the boy's mind to the deeper values of spirituality. He chanced to lay his hands on a copy of Periya Puranam, which relates the lives of the Saiva saints. He read the book and was enthralled by it. This was the first piece of religious literature he read. The example of the saints fascinated him, and in the inner recesses of his heart, he found something responding favorably. Without any apparent earlier preparation, a longing arose in him to emulate the spirit of renunciation and devotion that constituted the essence of saintly life. Then at the age of 17, on 21st August 1896, a day much like any other, Venkatraman had an experience of death that would entirely change his life. That evening, while sitting alone in a room on the first floor of his house, he was suddenly seized with an overwhelming fear of death. The fear so powerfully concentrated his mind that he began an intense inquiry. The shock made me at once introspective or introverted. I said to myself mentally, "Now death has come. What does it mean? What is it that is dying? This body dies." I at once dramatized the scene of death. I extended my limbs and held them rigid, as though rigor mortis had set in. "Well, then," said I to myself, "this body is dead. It will be carried to the burning ground and reduced to ashes. But with the death of this body, am I dead? Is the body I? This body is silent and inert, but I feel the full force of my personality and even the sound I within myself. Apart from the body, so I am the spirit, a thing transcending the body." All this was not a mere intellectual process. It flashed before me vividly as living truth. As Sri Ramana narrated this experience later on for the benefit of his devotees, it looked as though this was a process of reasoning, but he took care to explain that this was not so. The realization came to him in a flash. He perceived the truth directly. I was something very real, the only real thing. Fear of death had vanished once and for all. From then on, I continued like the fundamental Shruti note that underlies and blends with all other notes. Thus, young Venkatraman found himself on the peak of spirituality without any ardors or prolonged sadhana. There was noticed a complete change in the young boy's life. The things he had valued earlier now lost their worth. The spiritual principles which he had ignored till then became the only object of attention. School studies, friends, relations, none of these had any more significance for him. He grew utterly indifferent to his surroundings. Humility, meekness, non-resistance, and other virtues became his adornment. Avoiding company, he preferred to sit alone, absorbed in concentration on the self. Every day, he went to the Meenakshi temple and experienced exaltation standing before the images of the gods. Tears flowed from his eyes profusely. I would occasionally pray for the descent of grace upon me, so that my devotion might increase and become perpetual like that of the 63 canonized saints. Mostly, I would not pray at all, but let the deep within flow on and into the deep without. Tears would mark this outflow of the soul, but not betoken any particular feeling of pleasure or pain. About 6 weeks after his death experience, Venkatraman's elder brother, Nagaswami, coming into the room and seeing his younger brother sitting in samadhi, roused him and pointing to some school books said, "Why should one who behaves in this way retain all this?" Venkatraman thought, "What my brother says is true. What business have I here now?" And the thought of Arunachala, which had previously caused him such a thrill, came to him. Taking 3 rupees from money given to him to pay his brother's school fees, Venkatraman left a short unsigned note and departed for the railway station. "I have, in search of my father and in obedience to his command, started from here. This is only embarking on a virtuous enterprise. Therefore, none need grieve over this affair. To trace this out, no money need be spent. Your college fee has not yet been paid. ₹2 are enclosed herewith." Thus, Venkatraman retained at Viluppuram near Pondicherry for food and thereafter decided to walk. By sunset, he arrived at Arayaninallur temple, where he remained for meditation and later went to the nearby village of Killur. The next day, after pledging his earnings for 4 rupees, he entrained for Tiruvannamalai, arriving before noon on September 1st, 1896. Immediately, he went to the Arunachaleshwara temple, and it was there at the Ayyankulam tank that Venkatraman tore his dress to make a kopinam, threw everything else away, including his remaining money and his Brahman sacred thread, and allowed a barber to give him a tonsure. Venkatraman would spend about 18 months within the presence of Arunachaleshwara temple. To begin with, he would sit in some corner, motionless, not speaking to anyone. Around midday, he would leave the temple to beg a little rice in town. As he did not even have a bowl in which food could be placed, he simply held out his hands to receive whatever was given. He would then eat, wipe his hands on his hair, and immediately return to the temple compound. Eventually, he moved into an underground cell in the courtyard of the first prakaram of the 1,000-pillar mandapam of the Arunachaleshwara temple. The dark, sheltered spot was known as Pathalalingam, and it was here that became his place of meditation. Sitting in the dark, damp cell for hours at a stretch completely lost in samadhi, his body developed sores and worms crawled out of his raw flesh. Local urchins began to pelt him with stones. The intensity of the Swami's tapasya started to receive attention, and it was at this time that Sri Seshadri Swamigal entered Venkatraman's life. On leaving the presence of the Pathalalingam, the young Swami spent a few weeks near the Subramanya shrine and then passed to the adjoining Ilippai flower garden. After spending a few days in the vehicle's room at the Arunachaleshwara temple, the now named Brahmana Swami moved to the Mangai Pillayar temple, where he had his first constant attendant, Uddandi Nayanar and Annamalai Thambiran. From the shrine, he moved to Gurumurtham, where he spent the next 18 months. While at Gurumurtham, a man from Kerala named Parani Swami joined him as his permanent attendant. As days passed and as Ramana's fame spread, increasing numbers of pilgrims and sightseers came to visit him. After about a year's stay at Gurumurtham, the Brahmana Swami moved to a neighboring mango orchard. Until this point, the young sage observed silence and never revealed his identity, but due to the persistence of devotees, he eventually identified himself as Venkatraman Tiruchuri. News spread and eventually an uncle arrived from his native place to take him home, but all efforts proved futile. Mother Azhagammai, refusing to accept her son's decision, arrived in Tiruvannamalai with her eldest son Nagaswami and finally met up with Venkatraman at Pavarakundru. Day after day, the mother and the eldest brother visited the young Swami and tried to influence him in various ways. Finally, her son wrote this reply on paper: "The ordainer controls the fate of souls in accordance with their past deeds, their prarabdha karma. Whatever is destined to happen will happen. Do what you may to stop it. This is certain. The best course, therefore, is for one to be silent." From that time onward, the young Swami lived on the hill, moving from one cave to another. After living in the mango tree cave, he went to the Virupaksha cave, where he was to live for 16 years until 1916. People soon started coming up the hill to see him. In 1902, a government official named Sivaprakasham Pillai, with writing slate in hand, visited the young Swami in the hope of obtaining answers to questions long perplexing him based upon how to know one's true identity. The 14 questions put to the young Swami led to the first enunciation of the teaching that was based on the sage's own self-discovery. It would come to be known as the doctrine of self-enquiry and would eventually be published in book form under the title, Who Am I? In 1907, Kavyakanta Ganapati Sastri, known as Ganapati Muni, because of the austerities he has been observing, came to visit the young sage. Ganapati Muni had the title Kavyakanta and his followers addressed him as Naina. He was a specialist in the worship of the Divine Mother, a brilliant Sanskrit scholar, a prolific poet, and had already gathered a small group of disciples around him. He had visited Venkatraman twice before, but he had not put any questions to him. But during this visit, he entreated the young Swami to enlighten him as to the nature of tapas. Finally, breaking his silence, Venkatraman, speaking in Tamil, said to Sastri, "If one observes whence this notion, I, springs, the mind is absorbed into that. That is tapas. When a mantra sound is produced, the mind is absorbed into that. That is tapas." Sastri, believing that the goddess Uma, whom he worshipped, had given his revelation through Venkatraman's instruction, at once composed 5 verses in praise of young Venkatraman, and shortened the name of the young sage to Ramana. The next day, he wrote about the event to his family and followers, requesting them to henceforth address the sage as Bhagawan and as Maharishi or great seer. Henceforth, Brahmana Swami was to be known as Sri Bhagawan Ramana Maharishi. In 1912, the Maharishi underwent a second death experience in the company of a group of devotees. He was returning from a pond when suddenly he felt unwell and for about 15 minutes showed the symptoms of death. Unlike the first experience of death, this event was not attended by any fear on his part, for his inner awareness of being continued undiminished throughout. From that time on, he would manifest the kind of supra-consciousness known as Sahaja Nirvikalpa Samadhi. This is a state which the Maharishi simply described as a continuous fixation in the self with, at the same time, the full use of the thinking mind and other normal faculties. Henceforth, the world would never again be shut out from his awareness even while in meditation. Other people would no longer disturb him and he would have no need to remain in seclusion, for he perceived the self in everyone alike. In 1916, Mother Azhagammai and her son Nagasundram joined Sri Ramana at Tiruvannamalai and followed him when he moved to the larger Skandashram cave, where Bhagavan lived until the end of 1922. The mother received training in intense spiritual life. She donned the ochre robe and took charge of the ashram kitchen. Ramana's younger brother Nagasundaram then became a sannyasin, assuming the name Niranjanananda. Among Ramana's devotees, he came to be known as Chinnaswami. In 1920, the mother grew weak and Ramana tended her with care and affection. Azhagammai finally left the body on May 19, 1922, whereupon Sri Bhagavan indicated that she had attained liberation. Her body was buried on the banks of Palli Tirtham, a tank at the foot of the southern slope of Arunachala. After the mother's passing away, Bhagavan would often walk from Skandashram to her tomb. Then in December 1922, he came down from Skandashram permanently and settled at the base of the hill. In due course, many devotees came to live in the presence of Bhagavan, and in this way, the present Sri Ramana Ashram developed. Perfect equality was the principle lived by Bhagavan in the ashram. He always sat among the devotees for meals, and in the case of edibles and treats offered to him, everything would be equally distributed in his presence, as well as human beings. Cows, dogs, monkeys, squirrels, and peacocks enjoyed perfect freedom and full right in the ashram. The doors of the hall where Sri Bhagavan lived were open to all day and night. In 1928, a young man aged 22 became the Maharishi's personal attendant and given the name Annamalai Swami. His duties, as directed by Sri Ramana, were to oversee the ongoing construction at the ashram, including the Goshala, dining hall, dispensary, and other various projects. A temple eventually was raised over the tomb of the mother Azhagammai and consecrated in 1949. As the years rolled by, the ashram steadily grew, and people from India and throughout the world came to see the sage and receive his help. Maharishi consistently guided the seeker back to the source of abiding happiness, one's own self. His teachings are among the clearest and most direct of the Advaitic teachings originating from India. Ramana taught that we exist as a supreme self at all times, and one needs only awaken to this reality by seeking the source of the ego or I thought and abide in the self. He referred to this method as self-enquiry. Ramana always encouraged people to live life in the most natural manner. There was no question of engaging or disengaging in activity. All happens to destiny. The primary consideration is to be free from I am the doer illusion. The path of self-enquiry liberates one from the never-ending fear and disorder resulting from taking the ego to be real. By becoming free of the ego illusion, one experiences true freedom and supreme peace. It is a path that takes one from the apparent duality of the individual and the world to the bliss of one's real nature. Through this awakening to self-awareness, even by imperfect glimpses, one begins to sense a reality not limited to the ego's world. And this current of awareness is ultimately revealed as the self, pure consciousness. Ramana's first Western devotee was thought to be Frank H. Humphreys. He came to India in 1911 to take up a post in the police service at Vellore. Given to the practice of occultism, he was in search of a Mahatma. He was introduced to Ganapati Sastri by his Telugu tutor, and Sastri took him to Ramana. The Englishman was greatly impressed. Writing about his first visit to the sage in the International Psychic Gazette, he said, "On reaching the cave, we sat before him at his feet and said nothing. He sat thus for a long time, and I felt lifted out of myself. For half an hour I looked into the Maharishi's eyes, which never changed their expression of deep contemplation. The Maharishi is a man beyond description in his expression of dignity, gentleness, self-control, and calm strength of conviction. Humphrey's ideas of spirituality changed for the better as a result of the contact with Ramana. He repeated his visits to the sage and continued to record his impressions in letters to a friend in England, which were published in the Gazette. In one of them, he wrote, "You can imagine nothing more beautiful than his smile, and it is strange what a change it makes in one to have been in his presence." People poured into Maharishi's ashram as his fame spread, fueled by word of mouth and publicly generated by books and articles of various supporters and authors. Paul Brunton is credited with opening up to the West the experience and knowledge of enlightenment. Other important chroniclers were Julian P. Johnson, W. Somerset Maugham, and Mercedes de Acosta. Not only good people were attracted to the ashram, sometimes bad ones turned up also, even bad sadhus. Twice in the year 1924, thieves broke into the ashram in quest of money. On the second of these occasions, they even beat Maharishi after finding that there was little for them to take. When one of the devotees sought the sage's permission to punish the thieves, Sri Ramana forbade him, saying, "They have their dharma, we have ours. It is for us to bear and forbear. Let us not interfere with them." When one of the thieves gave him a blow on the left thigh, he told him, "If you are not satisfied, you can strike the other leg also." After the thieves had left, a devotee inquired about the beating. Ramana remarked, "I also have received some puja," punning on the word which means worship but is also used to mean blows. Bhagawan Ramana Maharishi showed the same consideration to animals as to the people. Birds and squirrels would build their nests close to him, and mother monkeys were often seen to bring their babies to him for blessings in the same way human mothers would bring their children. Ramana never referred to animals in the usual Indian style as it, but always he or she. At mealtime at the ashram, the animals were always fed first, then sadhus or beggars who might have chanced by, and then the devotees. He referred to the ashram dogs as the lads. Many animals found their way to the ashram, including dogs, cats, cows, peacocks, squirrels, birds, and monkeys. Squirrels would hop through the window of Ramana's room, and they always keep treats for them by his side. The animals felt his grace, and he loved them in return. Despite protest from his followers, Ramana would not have the snakes that inhabited the ashram grounds killed, as he felt it was the people who were the invaders, so the homes of all the animals should be respected. He treated the snakes with great respect, and it was said no devotee was ever harmed by one. Many animals would gather in the evenings when Bhagavan sat in the hall. On occasions when Bhagavan would be delayed, the animals would come to the hall and peer anxiously in the direction of his empty couch. Bhagavan was very intimate with the animals, especially the local monkeys who considered him one of their own. Once Bhagavan and his devotee walked farther than expected and had become hungry. Out of nowhere appeared a band of monkeys who swarmed to the top of a high fig tree, shaking its branches so that all of the fruit dropped to the ground for Bhagavan and his followers. The monkeys, taking no fruit for themselves, left as quickly as they had appeared. The most favored of all the animal devotees was a cow named Lakshmi. She was brought along with her mother as a gift to Bhagavan. As he felt the ashram could not properly care for the cows, they were taken to a farm in a neighboring village. After Lakshmi had been with the farmer for more than a year, the man went one evening to Ramanashram, bringing Lakshmi and her mother with him for a visit. Lakshmi was irresistibly attracted to Ramana and must have noted carefully the way to the ashram. The next day, she appeared on her own, and from then on, came every day and returned by herself to her own home in the evening. She soon became a permanent member of the ashram. During her life, Lakshmi bore several calves, at least 3 of them on Bhagawan's birthday. She was extremely devoted to Bhagawan and he showed her the utmost grace and kindness. On June 17, 1948, Lakshmi became very ill and it was clear her time had come. Bhagawan went to her and said, "Amma, do you want me near you?" He sat down and cradled her head in his lap, putting one hand on her head and one over her heart, just as he had done when his own human mother lay dying. He gazed into Lakshmi's eyes for a long time and lay his cheek against hers, stroking her gently. She focused all of her attention on Bhagawan and was conscious up to the end, her eyes bright and clear. On June 18th at 11:30 a.m., she left her body peacefully. She was buried in the ashram compound with full funeral rites. Her grave is next to those of a deer, crow, and dog also buried by Bhagawan. A stone was placed over Lakshmi's grave with her likeness carved on it. On the stone was also engraved the epitaph he had written for her stating she had attained final liberation. Life in the ashram flowed on smoothly. With the passage of time, more and more visitors came, some of them for a short stay and others for longer periods. The dimensions of the ashram increased and new features and departments were added. A home for the cattle, a school for the study of the Vedas, a publication department, and the Mother's Temple within which worship was regularly conducted. Ramana sat most of the time in the hall, witness to all that happened around him. He was also active with ashram duties and used to stitch leaf plates, dress vegetables, read proofs received from the press, look into newspapers and books, and suggest lines of reply to letters received. There were numerous invitations for him to undertake tours, but he never left Tiruvannamalai and in later years the ashram. From the day Ramana set foot in Tiruvannamalai, he did not move away even for a moment, but lived there continuously for 54 years. In 1949, a lump began to grow on the lower portion of his left upper arm. At first, the lump was very small, but grew bigger after 2 operations, bleeding profusely and continuously, and proving to be cancerous. All kinds of treatment were tried, including radium application, but in vain. Even after the 4th operation, which was done on December 19, 1949, the disease was not cured. The sage was quite unconcerned and was supremely indifferent to suffering. As he sat, a spectator watching the disease waste the body, his eyes shone as bright as ever, and his grace flowed towards all beings. Crowds came in large numbers, and Ramana insisted they should be allowed to have his darshan. Devotees intensely wished the sage should cure his body through an exercise of supernormal powers, but the Maharishi never exhibited even the slightest interest in siddhis. Even during the period of great torture caused by the disease, Bhagavan comforted the devotees whenever they were worried about his health. He once remarked, "The body itself is a disease that has come upon us. If a disease attacks the original disease, is it not good for us?" And remarked to another devotee lamenting over his illness, "Oh, you are grieving as if your Swami were going away. Where to go? How to go? Going and coming is possible for the body, but how can it be possible for us?" No one was prevented seeing him till the very end, which came at 8:47 p.m. on Friday, April 14, 1950. Earlier that evening, the sage gave darshan to devotees. All present knew that the end was nearing, and they sat singing Ramana's hymn to Arunachala with the refrain Arunachala Siva. The sage asked his attendants to make him sit up. He opened his luminous and gracious eyes for a brief while. There was a smile, a tear of bliss trickled down from the outer corner of his eyes, and at 8:47 the breathing stopped. There was no struggle, no spasm, none of the signs of death. At that very moment, a comet moved slowly across the sky, reached the summit of the holy hill Arunachala, and disappeared behind it. Hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of Saints of India. If you'd like to support this series, please consider contributing at patreon.com. The link for the same is given in the description. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha.